All right, so I was just out here a little bit ago telling you guys not to do anything dumb. Do you want to hear one of the dumbest things I've ever done? Okay. Where are my volleyball players at? Where are my volleyball players at? What's up? Hey, fun fact about me, volleyball was my sport all through high school. I grew up in an area that boys volleyball was very big, unlike Colorado. Hey, so I'm at a tournament, and if you've played a tournament before, it's probably true for most sports. Man, I feel like you're waiting to play a game more than you're actually playing games. You know what I'm talking about? Like you're always waiting around, and so every time there's a tournament, me and my friends would just get into a ton of trouble because we were just bored, right? We're just bored, and so we knew we had a game coming up in like 45 minutes. We're like, 45 minutes is an eternity. What do we want to do? So we start exploring this college campus. It's this huge campus. We see on the other side of the gym, there's this huge hill, this massive hill, and it kind of drops down. It's like hundreds of feet. Then there's this little like kind of service road that no one really drives down, and then a bunch of shops. And on the other side of this fence, there were all these like perfectly shaped rocks for throwing. And we're like, we got to throw these rocks. Like it would be a sin not to throw these rocks. So we pick up these rocks, and we just start hucking these things. And none of us can clear the hill because it's so tall, so big. And so we're out there for like 20 minutes. My arm's tired. I'm like, we're going to lose the next game. Like we're just throwing these things. And then all of a sudden, I find like a rock chiseled by God himself, this like perfect saucer. And I'm like, guys, watch this. And I huck this thing. It hits some gust of wind. It flies, and it goes over the hill, hits like the end of the street. And then the shop I was telling you about was actually a car detailing shop. And it then goes and just smacks this like brand new Mercedes. Just right there getting serviced. And we can see it from hundreds of feet away, this huge dent, just boom, just right in the hood of the car. And we all just freeze. Just like, do you ever do that? Like you do something stupid? I should run, right? None of us run. We're just like, oh my gosh, what did we just do? And then there's a guy down there who's like, hey, what are you guys doing? Then we run. We run back into the gym, and we have like 5 minutes until the game starts, and we're like, oh my gosh. Like how? And we realize there were like 10 volleyball courts. It's a huge tournament. And I'm like, there's no way they're going to know that's us. And so we go into our game. We win the first match. It's like, hey, good. And then we go to the second game. Middle of the second game, my buddy who's playing next to me taps me on the shoulder and like points to the corner. We see 2 police officers walk inside. And we're like, okay, that's just a coincidence. Maybe their kids are playing the tournament. We don't know. And so we keep playing. They start walking over. Someone's pointing like to us over at the back corner. They had to walk all the way across to get to where we're playing. And we're like, how do they know that it was us? And so they walk all the way over. They walk up to our coach, and the coach proceeds to take out all 4 of us that were throwing rocks. Like literally just like boom, 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 boom. And we're like, there were cameras. Like there were cameras somewhere. Somehow they had facial recognition software. I don't know what's going on. This is way before that though. We go out and we're talking to the police officers, and police officers are like, you gonna tell us what happened? And we're like, I mean, we were winning. We were playing the volleyball game. Like what else could have happened? You know? And he's like, dude, we know you guys were throwing rocks off the hill. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, sir. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, hey, next time you're throwing rocks off a hill, don't wear your school jersey with all the front Fountain Valley High School and our numbers massive on the backs. And they were like, this is literally the easiest case we've ever had in our lives. Like, are you gonna like be honest now? And so I'm like, all right, it was me. And he's like, I know that. I'm like, okay, cool. So they end up giving my number to the guy's car that we had hit. And the next day we have a phone call. This guy was mad. He's very mad. He starts yelling at me. And here's the thing. This is one of the stupidest things I've ever done. But you heard something like, this is silly, this is funny, we laugh at it. But there was like a moment talking to this guy when all of a sudden he said, well, I just got an estimate and it's $4,000 to fix the hood of the car. And it was like, some of you are feeling that right now. You're like, this isn't funny anymore, right? And I'm like, wait, what? And we get off the phone with him. And my parents didn't have the money. And they were like, how are we going to come up with this? And they start listing off everything that I own that I'm going to have to sell. I'm like, all right, well, how much can we get for your Xbox? I'm like, my Xbox? It's like, all right, how much can we get for your skateboard? How much can we get for your bike? They start going through everything. I had saved up money to buy my car. I was going to get my driver's license in a year. And I'm like, they're like, we're taking that money. And it still wasn't going to pay enough. I was probably going to get I was going to have to do like community service to pay off like the crime because I also fled the scene. And it was like, in a moment, it was all laughing and giggles until it wasn't, right? Have you guys had a moment like that before? Where you did something really stupid? Or maybe you just had a moment where it felt like your world was normal until it wasn't. It was like everything was fine until all of a sudden it wasn't. And I don't know what you call that. I call it a storm. It was like, just like a storm, I can remember this moment where life seemed calm, and then all of a sudden, I was in the middle of a storm, and I didn't know when it was going to end. In case you were wondering, months went by, the guy never called us, and to this day, I never heard back from the guy, which is in some ways worse, because for like a year, I just felt like I had like a warrant out for my arrest or something. I avoided eye contact with every police officer I saw to this day. So anyways, you've been in a storm before, right? Maybe you didn't do something stupid like me and throw rocks at a car, but maybe you had a storm where you made a decision with yourself and you told yourself you'd never do something again, and then you did. And it's like all of a sudden you feel like, I don't know if I can actually control this thing in my life. It feels like this thing is controlling me. Maybe you got in a fight with one of your closest friends, and this is the person that brought you life, and now they won't even talk to you. And the storm starts brewing because you're thinking to yourself, will I ever have someone like that again? Maybe you're like me in high school and you get cheated on. Anyone else been cheated on before? Oh, don't raise your hand. Just kidding. I raised mine too. But you get cheated on, and all of a sudden this relationship, this person that you thought you trusted, you don't know them at all. The storm starts, I didn't know that they didn't really love me then. Will I ever know? These storms start brewing over and over again above your head. If you're like me in high school, I feel like I was in one long storm after another. If the climate, I talked about this last year at camp, the conflict in my home, I had a lot of addiction in my home. And I feel like I never wanted to go home because I knew I'd end up fighting with my dad. I'd end up fighting with someone. And it really felt like every time I was coming home, I felt like I was stepping underneath dark clouds of a storm. And what's so debilitating about it is, like there's nothing I can do to control this. I can't change the climate of my home. I'm the kid here, right? Like, how am I supposed to change the environment in my home? Something I love so much about the Bible is it's filled with moments of people feeling just like that. Moments where people feel like this is it. Like, I don't know what else. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this storm that I'm in the midst of. One of my favorite moments is the story where the disciples are literally in a storm. You might have heard this before, but I want you to, if you have, just erase that. Hear this for the first time. This is what it says in Mark 4. It says, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, this is Jesus, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so it was nearly swamped. Where is Jesus? Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The God I worship sleeps. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Look at their response. They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." So again, right before this, Jesus has actually been teaching to people standing on a boat. What we know is that what Jesus would do is a common area for people to kind of gather would be at these ports where like a lot of fishermen would take out their boats. And so what Jesus would do to talk to the most people is he'd go to these ports, he'd literally stand on a boat, which would become a stage like this, and he'd teach people. And what he'd usually do is get off the boat and then walk along the Sea of Galilee, go to another port, stand up on that, and he'd teach people. And what would happen is people would just follow him port to port. And that's why when you hear just like stories about Jesus teaching to 5,000 people, you're like, how did 5,000 people find out? They literally followed Jesus to hear more from him. Because every time he stopped, he said something else. And so he just got done with probably having multiple teachings like this. And he then says, okay, this is it. So the only way to get away from these people that just keep following him is he said, all right, let's go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee because they're not going to follow us behind, right? So they get in the boat. They're with the disciples. They go across to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And it says that a furious squall starts. And what I love about it just says furious. It's almost like I read it, and it's like it's saying the storm is so violent and crazy and overwhelming that it's like the storm is mad at them. Like the storm is angry at them. Like, you ever been so angry with someone, like you have to say, like, I'm furious with you right now? Like, that's like the most extreme form. Like, I'm furious. Like, the storm is furious with them. And here's the thing. Most of the disciples were fishermen. Most of the disciples were fishermen. This is what they did. They were not new to storms. They were not new to the sea. They were not new to having to navigate through this. The Sea of Galilee was notorious for this. I'm not going to nerd out in the science of this because I don't understand it. But like, there's this massive hill, kind of like in Denver when a storm brews. Have you ever had that moment where we get like a 60-degree like temperature shift and you can literally see it coming over the mountains, coming in? That's a lot what happens at the Sea of Galilee is a storm brews, and it's like it falls into the Sea of Galilee and creates these like massive storms. It can be the most beautiful day. In the blink of an eye, it's this crazy storm. That's what we're in the midst of. And it has to be so bad that these experienced fishermen are terrified for their lives, and they think that they're going to die. It says that the water has filled up the sides of the boats. It's almost now overflowing out of the boat. Like, I don't know how this boat is still floating in the water. It's filled with water. They're frantically trying to get out. They realize there's nothing to get out. And then Jesus gets up, and he just uses 3 words. He says, quiet, be still. And if you know the New Testament, so like the second half of the Bible, most of it's written in Greek. And the words that he uses literally translates to be quiet and stay quiet. Who has heard that from a parent before? Be quiet and stay quiet. Okay, how many of you leaders have said that to your kid before, right? A lot of you. That's something you say to a toddler. Think about that for a second. The very thing that made the disciples think that their life was over, Jesus looks at it like a little kid. And he literally gets up and he uses 3 words. And he says, be quiet, still. What? And no wonder the disciples' response to that is they're terrified. You just talk to the storm like a toddler, like a little kid. Who is this? And the more and more I read this verse, I read people who are way smarter than me who spend their lives reading verses like this. They say unequivocally, the purpose of this passage is to say one thing. Jesus is power. Notice what I said. Jesus is power. Jesus has power for sure. But even further than that, Jesus is power. What we see all throughout, I'm not going to bore you with all the verses of this. Here's one example. When Jesus is coming to earth from heaven, like that gospel video we watched, he's walking down the stairs. Jesus leaves his throne in heaven to come down to earth, right? In the first couple verses of the book of John, it describes like how incredible of a moment this is in the history of humanity, that God himself would take on flesh so that he could dwell among humans. Like he literally become a human so he could walk with us and show us how to live. Like that's an incredible thing. And one little verse in it just says this. It says, through him, it's talking about Jesus, all things were made. Which is interesting. You're like, think about this. Through him, all things were made. Like, what does that mean? In other verses, it says, from the very moment of creation, when God created everything that we see, imagine the amount of power it took to create every planet and star that we still haven't even found yet in the entire universe that we exist. Not just let alone our own planet and all of the nuances that we have within our planet. Like the power it would take to be able to create that in a breath. And the Bible says that power that made that possible was Jesus. Jesus literally is power. Any power that you see in the world is on loan from Jesus because Jesus is power. That's the most important thing of all of this. Jesus is power. So then why does that matter? It's simple. If Jesus is power, then we can rest in him. Jesse this morning did such a great job talking about like, man, what it looks like to allow Jesus to give us rest. Justin last night says we must first receive from Jesus what he has from us. The reason we can do that is because Jesus is power. And so if Jesus is power, he contains all power, we can safely rest in him. We can rest in him because he is power. So why weren't the disciples resting in him on the boat? Did they not know that? The disciples watched Jesus raise people from the dead. The disciples watched Jesus literally walk up to a blind man, take some dirt, spit on it, rub it on the guy's eyes, kind of gross, rub it on the guy's eyes, and now he sees for the first time in his life. He walks up to people who've never walked in their life, and then all of a sudden they walk. They watched Jesus do these things over and over again. They saw him walk. There's one of my favorite moments. This woman who's been bleeding for 12 years touches the edge of his cloak. Like literally his clothes, touches the very edge of it, and she's healed immediately. And he notices, and he turns to her, and he looks at her in the face and says, "Take heart, your faith has healed you." Like what kind of power that is, and how fast they forget it in the midst of the storm. They know this, right? They should know better. They should know better. Like over and over again in Scripture, we see the disciples. If you haven't read the first 4 books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, you're in for a treat. Over and over again, these disciples, these 12 guys that Jesus calls to follow him, they screw up over and over again. If you want to feel better about yourself, just read the Gospels and listen to some of the things the disciples do. Most of listening to the disciples is you kind of laughing at them, like, what were you thinking, right? Like, well, do you not understand what's happening here? For some reason, I don't have that same thought in this moment, though. Do you guys? There's something about this story that's different to me. Something in this story is a little different. Yeah, they watched him raise someone from the dead. They watched him do all these things. They knew his power, so why would they forget? And the only question that kind of popped in my head one time when I was reading this is, take a step back and ask yourself, well, why? Hold on. Jesus, we thought we were dying. Why were you sleeping? Like, I know I was kind of laughing at it. Like, I love that Jesus takes naps. But take a moment of humanity for a second, and what would that feel like for the disciples? To think that they're in their final hour, and to look at the man that they left everything for. They left their family businesses. They left everything to follow Jesus. They were ran out of every city they went into. They were threatened to be killed. They did all of that. And the man they did it all for is sleeping in the boat. What is happening in this text? And of course, then they ask him the question, as they think they're going to die, this question that I think many of us ask of God ourselves, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" They don't yell, "Jesus, wake up! Jesus, wake up!" They run to Jesus and say, "Jesus, do you even care?" Because I think buried beneath that, this is what they're saying. "Jesus, if you loved me, you wouldn't let this storm happen. Jesus, if you loved me, you wouldn't let this storm happen. I thought you loved me, and now we're dying. We left everything to follow you, now we're dying, and you're sleeping?" I remember I became a Christian when I was 21. I remember I felt like I was kind of in this like honeymoon phase for a couple years, where it just felt like I saw God everywhere. And I started to read stories of people that had these horrible storms happen in their life. One of my Christian heroes is this guy, C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis is one of the most important Christian writers of the last 100 years. He's been dead a while, and he's still probably one of the best-selling authors in Christian literature because his stuff was so incredible. He literally wrote a book called The Problem of Pain, talking about really how can you believe that God is good even though we experience pain and suffering? Like those things seem to contradict, but he explains like, no, they don't contradict. He wrote this whole beautiful book on it. Then his wife died. He laid in anguish. Much like the disciples, he's crying out to God, God, where are you in the midst of this? Where are you? Teacher, don't you care if I drown? What's interesting, I was listening to this podcast of this guy named Bart Ehrman, who's a well-known Bible scholar, but he doesn't believe in God. He's an atheist, which some of you were like, that doesn't add up right. It doesn't. When Bart grew up in a normal life and in high school, got invited to a youth group, came to a camp like this, gave his life to Christ. I'm listening on this podcast, him talking about this, because I was so intrigued. I'm like, who is this guy? Why does he study the Bible if he doesn't believe in it? And he became a Christian. He went to college, and actually his youth pastor actually helped him get a scholarship to be able to go to college. Eventually gets his master's degree, then gets his PhD. And before he gets his PhD, he becomes an atheist. And he's actually being interviewed by another guy who doesn't believe in God. And he's just like, hey, so you're this Bible expert. I'm assuming when you're getting a PhD, like, what verse was it that made you, like, not believe in God anymore? It's so fascinating. He said, there is no verse. He's like, what? And he literally said, I couldn't believe in God anymore because I couldn't understand the evil that was happening in my life. Had nothing to do with the Bible. And he said, I wish I could believe this thing of God. He was in the midst of a storm, and the storm was so loud, it felt like he couldn't see God in the midst of it. And here's the thing. I've been working with students for coming up on 16 years now. And when I have old students who graduated, my first group of students graduated in 2011. And I know many of them have walked away from God for the same reason. Just like, I just don't see God in the midst of it. I don't understand it. I don't get it. It's a common theme. And so I feel compelled to not avoid this and to talk about this with you. Because I'm willing to bet many of you are in a storm right now. Then you read about Paul. Jesse talked about this morning over and over again. What you see is these people throughout the Bible who encounter these overwhelming storms. And years later, they were able to look back and be like, oh, God, that's what you're doing. And they had this ability to still be able to believe in God and love God. So what's different? And one of my favorite people of this is Paul. And I'm going to read this again. Jesse read this morning. In Philippians 4, Paul is writing this from prison. Which if I was in prison, I wouldn't be writing a book. If that was me or writing a letter, I'd be crying. This is what he says in Philippians 4. I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. He's in prison. And I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. What is Paul saying? I've actually found the secret. The secret of being able to enter a storm. The secret of being able to experience tremendous suffering in your life and not know where God is in the midst of it. I found the secret. And do you know what it is? It's Jesus. It's Jesus Christ. What does he mean? I can rest in Jesus because Jesus is power. And listen to this. And Jesus is with me. The thing Paul was trying to get us to understand is that in the midst of those storms, just like the disciples, we will be tempted to think that God has abandoned us. How easy would it have been for Paul? Paul was in prison because he was telling people about Jesus and he wouldn't stop. And governments literally said, like, bro, help us help you here. Stop talking about Jesus and you won't get thrown in jail. And he's like, cool, do you know Jesus? And they're like, bro, like, and so he goes into jail. He's in jail. He is in jail because of Jesus. But why does he still feel like I can be content here? Because he knows Jesus is in there with him. Jesus has never left him. Jesus is able to give him this hope and this peace in a season that where everyone outside is like, what are you doing? There's this moment where Paul, literally, people start singing worship in jail, and the officers that are working the jail start giving their lives to Jesus because they're like, this makes no sense. What are you doing? Do you realize you're in jail? And he's just like, yeah, but Jesus is with me. Jesus is with me. Like, why would I panic? So So I've never shared this from a stage before. And to be honest, it's going to be hard to share. I want to tell you about my biggest storm that I've experienced. A long time ago, I've been married to my wife, Anna, for 10 years. Anna, are you in here? Somewhere? Hey, babe. She's up there. If you haven't met Anna, you can clap for my wife all day. Yep. Okay, can I just pause? What's funny about that is some of you can't see her, have never talked to her or met her, and you're like, I'll clap for that. And I see you, I appreciate you. But we've been married for 10 years, and like any married couple, we want to have kids. And some of you probably know this from your parents, or your leaders in the room probably know this. Sometimes you don't always get to have kids when you want to have kids. Sometimes it doesn't always happen as easy as you like it to happen. And so that was our story for years. We tried over and over again, and it just didn't happen. And then one day, it's a super long story that I'm going to try to tell quickly. A friend of ours calls us. And says, hey, we're in a kind of a situation. We need someone to watch this baby who's 6 months old. We need you to take care of him for just about a month. She's like, I don't know if that's weird. I know you guys want to have kids. Maybe this would be fun to have him in the house. We're like, yeah, we'd love that. And so on 3 days' notice, we make the decision, like, all right, we'll take him in. And the day before, our whole small group, like you guys are in a group, our whole group, we just shot them a text. And I'm not kidding, immediately, 2 of them just Venmo'd us like $250. They're like, buy whatever you need. I'm like, what? Next day, we just have Amazon boxes on our front doorstep. People in our church just started giving us everything we need. So within 3 days, we turned an entire room into a nursery, had everything we needed. And 3 days later, we got this little boy named Ryder, which I actually brought a photo because it'd be weird if I didn't. But this is the first day we got him. Yeah, that's the only response. He's a cutie. You can clap for him. And what was supposed to be a month ended up being 2 years. So we got him as a little 6-month-old. Supposed to have him for a month, and quickly he became our son. He called me dad. We taught him to walk, taught him to eat. We taught him sign language so he could sign different things. He constantly was asking for food. He ate so much. We love this kid. We taught him how to walk. He walked his first steps to me. We learned his first words. And then what we found out, I'm oversimplifying a lot of this. We found out that we had about a month to prepare emotionally that he would no longer be able to live with us anymore. And I can still remember the day that we found that out. And just the feeling of that storm starting to brew over us. And for a month, we prayed the harder than I've ever prayed in my life. Every single night, we prayed with him. Before bed, he'd close his eyes, put his hands. He was so animated when he'd pray. We just prayed, God, would you do something? Would you do something? And the day came, we had to hand him to another person. And I can still picture that day. Handing him to someone, having to say goodbye to this kid, to my son. Watching my wife just collapse in tears. It was the hardest day of my life. And we just got in the car, and there's this empty car seat in the back. And we couldn't imagine going home, and so my mom was so nice. She said, hey, maybe don't go to your home. We want to see the toys around. We want to see all the stuff. And so she got us, we grew up in a city by the beach. So we got a little hotel by the beach, and we just kind of, most of the time, just sat in this hotel room, like, what are we supposed to do now? And I remember so many times we cried. The amount of times I just sat, just sitting there, like not knowing what to feel. And the storm was just brewing so loud, I couldn't hear God in the midst of it. It's like the lightning was so bright, I couldn't see God. The thunder was so loud, I couldn't hear him. And I remember feeling so convicted. I'm just being honest with you. It's like, I'm a pastor. I've taught messages on this. I've talked about Paul in prison. Be like Paul in prison. I'm so glad. No, I'm not. I don't know why this is happening. And so I've been in student ministry for 16 years. My My first time entering the student ministry, I was actually a small group leader, and I got these incoming freshman boys. And so I got all these incoming freshman boys, and one of them, his name was Brian. And what's cool now is he graduated high school in 2011, so he's become one of my close friends now. But what's so cool is I watched Brian go all through high school. I watched him deal with his first breakup. I watched him when he had conflict at home. I walked him through all those things. And then after he graduated, went to college. He actually became a therapist. Him and his wife had a kid. They have 2 kids now. He shoots me a text the day after. He lived down the street from where we were. And he didn't know what to say. He just said, hey, I love you. If you want to hang out, I'd love to hang out. But if not, I totally understand. And I remember texting him just like, we can hang out, but I don't know what I'm going to say to you. And he's like, you don't have to say anything. I'm like, okay, I can do that. So he meets us down just the lobby of the hotel. I'm like, I don't know if I can go outside of our lobby right now. He's like, okay. Go in the lobby of this hotel. My wife and I sit in the lobby, and we just start weeping. Just in this public lobby. People walking by, like, what is going on? As they're walking by. And we're just weeping, and I started to become embarrassed. And I'm like, I'm crying, and like you've probably been in that moment before where you're like crying and you keep saying, I'm sorry. And usually the person you're with is like, I don't understand why you're sorry. You're crying, you're not choosing to do this right now. And what I'll never forget is I looked up and I saw this kid, Brian, and he's crying. And in the midst of the storm, I feel like I couldn't see God in the midst of it, but I could see Brian. And I could see God through Brian. And it was like, we can look back. This is the part that gets me emotional. I can look back on that time and the amount, like the month leading up to, and in the moment, I'm like, God, where are you? And I just felt like I just got a glimpse of God just saying to me, I'm here. I'm crying with you. And I think that stuck out to me. I think that stuck out to me because I think for most of us, that's the greatest gift that God gives us, is he shows himself through people around us. I actually went back and forth on whether to share this or not. One, I'm actually surprised I got through it. But I also, a couple of us were stuffing all of your lanyards, the schedules, which you know how hard it is to take those schedules out. Imagine putting them in, okay, the first time. It was very difficult. It was actually Avery, who's dressed like me right now. And I was like, I told Avery, and I'm like, Avery, I'm thinking about sharing the story. I don't want to just share it if it's not going to mean anything, though. I've never shared about this from the stage, like, because I still don't even really know what I learned from this. Like, and would students even understand this? And if you didn't know, Avery's very wise. And she said, well, I think maybe if you shared your biggest storm, maybe that would encourage us to be able to share ours. It's like, fair. But then the second thing she said this, she said, I think most people can relate to losing something or someone. And that was ultimately the thing that made me say, I need to share this. Because the reality is many of the storms that you guys find yourself in are not storms that you chose to be in. You're not in the storm because you're an idiot and threw a car, or threw a rock at a car. Threw a car, that'd be crazy. You threw a rock at a car and you did something stupid like that. Most of the time, you're in the middle of a storm because you didn't do anything wrong. And you just found yourself in it. And if you're like me, you found yourself like, what am I supposed to do in the midst of this? But let me take a stab at what it might have felt like for you to feel a storm start. I think the most eerie part of a storm is you can remember for a faint, almost like a distant memory, like it was a different life, of when life was actually calm. When like everything in your life actually seemed normal. That like you had this like this calm moment where you actually understood maybe just a little bit about what your life looked like, and it was completely calm. And honestly, in that time, you probably didn't even think about storms. You didn't even think about storms. You're just living your best life, right? You're posting whatever you want. You're just hanging out with friends. Maybe you can't stop smiling. It was calm. But if it's like me, all of a sudden there's this moment where all of a sudden you start hearing some thunder and some lightning and you realize something's changing. There's things happening around me that I can't control, and things start to change and the storm starts to brew. The thing that happens if you're like me, when a storm starts, the first thing we do is we try to do everything we can to fix it. We try to do everything we can to fix it. We're just like the disciples. We're trying everything we can to actually take this water out of the boat over and over and over again. We're doing whatever it takes to calm the storm. You believe this lie in your head, I can fix this, I can fix this, I can do something about this. Maybe you start thinking to yourself, maybe I'm not praying enough, maybe I need to start serving someone, maybe that will fix this circumstance that I'm feeling. But the reality is this, I found that people respond in two ways when they're in the midst of a storm. Two common ways. The first one is this, we try to numb ourselves and deafen our ears and convince ourselves the storm isn't that bad. And what I've seen is I've seen the compounding of years over years over years of my friends who have spent years trying to just convince themselves it's not that bad. I'll just get over it. Meanwhile, the storm just continues to build. The second way is this. We spend the rest of our lives trying to fix it. And we don't realize in the process, we become something we never wanted to become before. So this storm continues to build and to build. Eventually you get to this moment where you ask the question that the disciples ask of Jesus, sitting in the boat as the storm is overwhelming. Water is coming in from side to side. They think this is their last moment, Scott. And you start having this moment and you finally look to God. Okay, maybe God will be able to help me in the midst of it. And you look over to God and it's like he's sleeping. If you're like me, I can think of these moments where I'm crying out to God over and over again. God, where are you in the midst of this? God, where are you in the midst of this? Do you even care? Are you even listening? It's been weeks. It's been months. Nothing is getting better. The storm just keeps getting louder and louder and louder. And you're finding yourself like, God, where are you in the midst of this? God, I had this moment where you were so real. You were so present. You were there in every moment. I can remember having quiet times with you and you giving me words and like, oh God, thank you for this. Thank you for this. Where is that? God, where are you in the midst of that? Why is this storm here? Because just like the disciples, God, if you loved me, this storm would not be raging over. I can't see anything. For like me, it's like I couldn't even see past the storm. I couldn't even see past the storm. All I could see was clouds and rain and lightning and thunder and water coming in and in and in. God, if you're real, will you please do something? And then maybe like me, you have a moment where you remember, I know that Jesus is power. Wait, but I know that he is with me in the midst of this. So if God is with me in the midst of this, why is this still happening? God, why is this still happening? And you remember this moment with the disciples where Jesus was able to calm the storm with 3 words, quiet, be still. And it's like everything calms. Here's the thing. I want to be really, really clear. In some ways, I feel like the storm hasn't ended for me when it comes to Ryder. I just have to be honest with you. But what God has given me in the midst of it, he's let me experience his rest and his peace in the midst of the storm. He's allowed me to experience this calm, this peace. Even though the storm, I still don't know why it happened. I still don't know why this happened. God, why did you take Ryder from us? He's been able to give us this peace. The Bible says it surpasses all understanding. that just as Jesse said, when I look back, I still can't see the clear picture like we see people all throughout the Bible who had these drastic storms, and like, God, where are we in the midst of it? And then all of a sudden it comes crystal clear. I can't see a crystal clear image, but I can see what Paul describes in 1 Corinthians. Is he says, right now, it's like we're seeing God through a foggy mirror. We're looking through this foggy mirror, and if we look close enough, we can see him in it. But what he says is that time is coming when we will see it clearly. He says there'll be a moment where we'll see Jesus clearly as if we were facing him face to face. And that's the day that I'll see the crystal clear image. What storm are you walking in right now? What storm feels so overwhelming to you right now? What's happening in your life that you can't control? That maybe right now, we're talking about Mary and Martha. You're like Martha, and you're trying to do everything you can to try to fix this mess that you're in. And it's just not getting better. Some of you have gotten so good at just distracting yourselves constantly. You have AirPods in 24/7. Not just because you're bored or you like this podcast you're listening to. You want to deafen the storm. You want to distract yourself, because when you sit in a moment of quiet, all you can hear is the storm. And I'm telling you right now, that is no way to live. You can't outchase the storm. The only answer in the midst of it is to rest in Jesus and to call out to Jesus. Jesus, I know that you are with me. I know that you are for me.